Leanne, welcome back. Here we are again.
Hi, Wesley.
Our second last roundtable.
Ooh.
Well, there's no one else in yet, so we're only talking to ourselves.
Hi, Diego.
Yeah, always Diego. Diego's my friend. He's my friend.
What will we do without Diego?
Yes. Here's now. Joseph. Oh, Lillian Crombie. Good to see you come on board. Hello.
Oh, Lillian.
Lillian Crombie. Famous, world famous actor. Sharina Clanton. Goodness, we've seen you, I think, almost every week, Sharina. Great to have you here. Millie, Natalia, great to have you on board. Thank you for coming in. Yeah, another big week. Especially interesting, that announcement yesterday. We'll talk a bit more when more people are in the room. But yeah, some interesting things to look at. Nothing too specific for First Nations people yet, which is
No.
annoying. And I know that first lot of Cherish funding will hopefully be going out the door very soon, hopefully in the next few days. So that'll be good. Yep. Astrid, good to see you. And Denise, thank you for coming in. So lots of things to keep doing. How have you been keeping, Leanne? What's been going on for you?
Oh, look, it's been, every day's a busy day. It's there's lots of things on, and I guess it's the end of financial year as well, which puts a lot of pressure and on people to get things going out the door and organised before we hit another new financial year. So yeah, no, it was good to hear of the 250 million rescue package yesterday. Whether I know it's very far from what people had been wanting. I think it was about 700 million, wasn't it? Across the creative industries. So yeah, we'll see what happens and how it'll all wash up.
Well, maybe it's the first of a couple of tranches of money that'll come. I mean, we live in hope. That terrible thing where we all have to act grateful. We all have to be grateful for things that we think are not enough, which is terrifying, actually, when you think about it. But we're learning to be, not just First Nations people, but all artists, learning to be grateful for scraps, when in fact we are incredibly powerful people, and how that all goes. Sharina Clanton asking already the question, how much of that 250 million rescue package is going to reach our Indigenous arts community? Though, I don't know. To be honest,
don't know.
Just to break that 250 down, please excuse us, everyone, as we're coming together. We might repeat this a bit later. But the 250 million, so 50 million of that is for the film sector, but it's really just to counter the insurance issues, because now their insurance bills are going through the roof because no one's going to insure them to make the films. So it's not actually to make the film. The $50 million put forward for film is for insurance. And then there's a $90 million allocation for concessional loans, which means that it's a low interest loan, repayable loan that can be made to build capital and things to do new shows or whatever. So that's there. Then I think there's about 35 million, I think it is, of which it's talked that the Australia Council will have a say over, but doesn't know whether it'll come to the Australia Council. So all up though, and then there's some monies for new festivals and new things, not for the existing so much. So there might be the large organisations will be looked after well. And Sharina's question and noticed, it will be interesting to see how much of this then goes back to Indigenous First Nations arts community. So even more reason for us to apply for these monies and get through this, because it's really important. It's about 2:01 now, and I see a whole range of people coming in, where we are about 34 people in the room at the moment, and it's great to see so many regular faces. This is our second last roundtable. Oh, goodness. We've been doing this for that long, Leanne. Look at you. And you're fresh as a daisy. Absolutely. I can't smell you, but I'm sure you're fresh as a daisy. Fresh as a daisy.
As are you, Wesley.
Yeah.
I can smell myself, and I'm not always that fresh. I can tell you now. But that was Vicky Cousins, everyone. She's coming. You'll see more of her in a second, as she and Ruth Langford are going to be talking to us. But how are you going? How is it all going in Adelaide, South Australia?
It's cold this week. I've really felt it. I don't know if there's any of our Adelaidean people on. Oh yeah, Lillian. Hi, Aunt Lil. Yeah, it's been pretty cold here. Look, it's just, like, as I was saying before, things are okay in Adelaide. I think, around the whole COVID thing, we're travelling really well. I mean, unlike you guys in New South Wales and Victoria, it's terrible to see what's happening across Melbourne with all of those cluster of hotspots, and it must be, pretty disappointing to see that occur. Is this the actual second wave? I don't understand how these pandemics work. Or is it just that there's been travellers and unfortunately extended families have gotten together and it's spread?
Yeah, and look, I think that some people will say this is the natural outcome, that it was always going to happen when we start to lift restrictions, especially those carriers, those symptomatic carriers of the virus who aren't sick themselves but can make others sick. That kind of spread will occur. There's some of the stuff in Victoria, as I understand, is people may not understand the implications of their actions as well. That there's lots of different conversations around people who don't have English as a first language, who were diagnosed with COVID-19 and then because of cultural obligations go ahead and have family gatherings and things that need to be done. And can't necessarily modify behaviours in those environments because they're family. So, one of the reasons why I think in First Nations communities across the nation, we did do a lot of that kind of cut the communities off, make sure that, they're absolutely isolated from any kind of infection, because we know culturally it's incredibly difficult not to have proper family gathering and proper coming together within a community. It's cultural. It's a cultural clash to think that there's this kind of isolation as well. So it's an interesting thing to kind of look through, and the stuff so much. I think that in Victoria, it's been. Look, there's a lot of returning visitors, and they go into hotels. And that some of them too are the security guards, and those people who are looking after them are also being exposed and not necessarily having all the proper techniques for high exposure. And so there's a few things there, security guards and things getting COVID-19 in Victoria because they don't have the right training to use the equipment that they do have. And hence why the army's being brought in, because they've got the training, especially the medical corps of the army and things have the training to deal with them, how that all works. So yeah, a little bit of relaxing of discipline, not a great thing.
That did worry me. I mean, I'm certainly, we're not out of the woods, and obviously we're not out of the woods. I mean, the numbers in the US are staggering. Oh. I mean, places like Texas, I was listening this morning, I mean, they've had 7,000 people diagnosed in one day. I mean, these are extraordinary figures, as much as we have in this country. And yeah, I'm really sort of worried for America. It just seems to, not get control of it.
Yeah, and the leadership.
And they are blaming Trump for that too.
Oh yeah, Trump saying, don't get tested. There was one expert who was saying that they believe that in fact the true infection rate in infection numbers in America now is closer to 20 million, that there might be 20 million people. There is a population of 320 million or something like that.
Right.
So, it's not the whole population, but it's those who are infected but asymptomatic and don't go get tested, because just to get a medical test there was costing about $1,500 if you didn't have medical insurance. So it's just a different system. They don't have a public health system the way we have. The other country to look to is Brazil. Bolsonaro there, who's full on. I'm just looking at a lot of the chat there as well, saying has anyone heard from our First Nations communities in America, the Native Americans there? and how is it going, especially on reservation and other places. Sharina Clanton saying the whole system is corrupt, maybe. Yes, and Denise, yes, the idea that Trump suggested just stop testing and the numbers will drop. Yes, that's true. Except, then your health system is just not getting there.
And the whole thing around wearing masks is interesting in the US. They think that they're Trump supporters because he is not showing that leadership by wearing a mask. Therefore, people are going, it's God's plan, it's going against God's plan to wear a mask. I mean, there's these crazy ideas that Americans have around, that the masks aren't going to work, or, you're wasting your time. It's just extraordinary.
And as always, even like we see in this country, from the outside, people can say, oh, Australia, it's the most racist country under the sun, and you blah, 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 and you got idiots there. Yeah, yes, that's true. But also there are a whole range of very important thinkers and people who are doing good work there. And in the United States in particular, it seems to be just a bit messed up as well. I see Denise writing in the chat there, heard that the Navajo community has been devastated. Their medical facilities are inadequate, and they're really sad there. Sharina saying our First Nations mob aren't getting access to basic medical supplies, and due to the corruptive system of insurances and things, you need a certain level of coverage to get your medical aid and attention. Yes, that's absolutely true. That's what I understand. There's a whole range of social Darwinism. Look, we could talk about this for forever. There's
absolutely
about 50 of us in the room now. This idea of when you have a public health emergency, you need a public health system to deal with it, which is very important. And this idea that you raised, Leanne, that suddenly science or the medical advice has become political and politicized, when one of the joys, if I can say this about this country, and I've got lots of things to say about this country that's not working, but you just feel that, in fact, what is working here is our medical system is looking after us. And can I just say a big shout out, thank the Lord for Pat Turner. I mean, thank the Lord for her.
Oh, she's been her leadership throughout this has been second to none. What a wonderful person who's just gone straight into the hearts of our communities and did not wait, acted straight away. I mean, just incredible.
Agreed. And Pat Turner's been one of those people who's gone, like, look, she rubs some people up the wrong way, don't get me wrong. She's not everyone's friend. But when it comes to looking after our community, she's really got there. It's 2:10, Leanne, and I wonder whether we should, though I love talking to you, goodness gracious, this is the highlight of my week. Just seeing your beautiful face and your lovely smile and your kind of generous spirit and just your brain ticking away. I just love being in the company of you. So we should maybe get on with our job.
Let's do this. Let's open it up.
Let's do that. Here we go.
Awesome.
I just need to, now I've lost my script because I've done this. Here we go. So just a big kind of shout out and to say, here we are. We're going to be talking about chosen, passing on knowledge to the next generation. Next slide. Thanks, Michelle. I'm Wesley Enoch. I'm the deputy, not the deputy, where am I? I'm the chair of the Promotion Strategy Panel and the Artistic Director of the Sydney Festival. And joining me is Deputy Chair of the Australia Council of the Arts, Tjunypa Buckskin. Leanne, as we were saying, wonderful to see you again on our second last roundtable. We've been doing this for almost 3 months, and it's great to be seeing where we're going and what the future might be as well. We've got a bit of a poll coming up later that we can talk through. But I might pass on to you, Leanne, to just maybe acknowledge country before we get going.
Yeah, certainly, Wesley. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Leanne, as Wesley said, and I'm a Narungga Wirrungga Wodjabalik woman. I reside here in Adelaide on Kaurna land. The Adelaide Plains is the lands of Kaurna people, and I pay my respects to their elders and both past, present and emerging people in our community. But also I'd like to acknowledge all the countries that that everyone is gathered on today and joining us from. So over to you, Wesley.
Excellent. We'll go to the next slide. Thanks, Michelle. Just to remind everyone that we're here on the First Nations Arts Roundtable to focus on a few things, to connect, to share, to have ideas, networks as well, and to navigate our way through this COVID-19 period. Next slide. Thanks, Michelle. So this sense of what we're doing today, we've got a few things. So we'll talk about some housekeeping in a second. Some of the key things that arose out of last week's sharing, which was talking about the Signature Works program. People remember large-scale, interesting works that have come through. This week, we've got guests, Ruth Langford and Vicky Cousins, who will be talking a little bit more about the Chosen program. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That this idea of what Chosen means as a key program at the Australia Council, but also I think a sense of what's going on in our communities anyway. We'll talk about some of the resources, and we'll talk about our next and final roundtable, which is happening next week on the 3rd of July. Next slide, thanks, Michelle. So housekeeping wise, if you haven't been here in the last 3 months, welcome. My God, where have you been? I'm so glad you've been able to join us this time, at least, on our second last one. I just want to talk you through the website, this site that we're working on. If you take your cursor, you can come down the bottom of the screen and you can see that there's participants. You can see who's in the room. There's a chat box. If you click on that, and many people have already been chatting away, talking to each other. But a quick little lesson, if you haven't got it already, open up the chat box. And if you just go down, you'll see that where you type at the bottom of the chat box says to, and you can hit that blue button and it can say all panelists and attendees. So you can talk to everyone that's here at the moment. And so that's the whole room, not just the panelists, because sometimes it's good to share your thoughts or your questions there that you might want to have. Just make sure it says all panelists and attendees. That's a very useful thing to make sure it doesn't get lost. Then along the way, if you take your cursor along a little bit more, there's a Q&A box. You can tap in that, and what that will do is it will bring up a box that you can type in a question, and either myself, Leanne, either of our panelists or those in the back room can answer that question, or we might even have a conversation live here online about what you might be asking along the way. And also, if you need to, there's closed captions. Just hit that too. Our captioner, who I haven't mentioned today, is sitting there in the room, making sure they can type away. And if you need to, I know you might want to put us on silent. I don't know why you would. We're very entertaining to listen to. So if you need to, you can just read what we're saying as the caption writer there is checking all the captions and typing away and making it all there clear for you. And if there's any problems, if we seem to disappear, if there's some bandwidth issues, I think we've all learned how to deal with the internet. There might be a moment where cameras get turned off or whatever. You'll just cope. You know how it is. You know.
Yeah, that's right. Don't stress about it. We'll get back on track.
Yeah, we'll get there. So we might just move to the poll. This is your chance to get interactive. Get your cursor ready. Renee might ask for the poll to be put up. Just here, so would you like to see the First Nations roundtables continue? So hosts and panelists can't vote because we voted a long time ago. So get in there and just vote away. When would you like them to occur? Weekly, fortnightly, monthly, or quarterly? What day of the week is interesting for you? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday? I know lots of people saying Friday's been useful because it seems like Tina Baum just then saying, oh, it's a good thing on like at the end of the day, come and listen to the dulcet tones of Leanne and Wesley. She uses us to just go to sleep in the afternoon in the office for a quick little nap, just listen to that. Gammon. And what format would you like to see? Interviews, panel discussions, more of Leanne and I, a little kind of dance, interpretive dance perhaps? Anything's possible there. Just keep scrolling down as you go. What content would you like to see addressed? Creative practice, cultural knowledge, creative workforce, markets, digital, intellectual property, topical news. A bit like we talked about that 250 million, Leanne. A little bit more of a conversation and unpacking of those things. And would you like to see the First Nations Roundtable live streamed on social media? Would you like to see this conversation there on Facebook or Twitter or whatever? So it's live streamed out there for the universe to have a look at and see what we're doing. All right, hopefully you've answered all those questions as we've gone through. So we might close the poll and Renee, see what's come back. Here we go. Again, 100% of you saying, yep, you want to see it. Oh, okay, fortnightly, monthly. That's interesting. That's kind of growing. A lot of people saying that now. Friday's still the favourite. What, no one likes Tuesday or Thursday ever? Oh, poor Tuesday or Thursday. Yes, panel discussion still good. A little bit more of Leanne. I think that interpretive dance, Leanne. People want to see that interpretive dance.
I don't think so.
Oh, yeah. Cultural knowledge is a big one this week, which is great. So that's good to see. And then also, yes, people happy to see it put on social media. There you go. Though it's interesting to see that group that says no, they don't want to. It's very interesting. Oh, well, there you go. There's a little bit of information coming to us along the way. We might move to the next slide, please, Michelle. Leanne, it's up to you now. Talk us through a little bit about what happened last week.
Last week. We have such fabulous people who come and join us every week. So last week we were talking about signature works, Wesley. And we had three incredible people, Andrea James, Zayn Saunders and Geena Williams. Andrea spoke about her practice, bringing Yorta Yorta, Gunai Kurnai stories to the stage. Andrea believes that theatre is a great vehicle for activating language and performance, and we're seeing a lot more of that, Wesley, coming through our creative works over the last few years. Andrea spoke specifically about the works, The Great Woman of Gippsland, and her signature works project, Sunshine Supergirl. Sunshine Supergirl tells the story of Yvonne Goolagong and has been 4 years in the making. And so she being Andrea, has been doing consultations, ongoing consultations with Yvonne and her family. And Andrea really wants to represent the voice of Yvonne, you know, accurately throughout this. Andrea spoke also of how they have adapted their development process. During these challenging times of COVID, by sticking very strictly to their timelines and activities via Zoom and Skype, if needed. So, and I think most of theatre practitioners are actually doing that. Zayn Saunders spoke about Spirit and Cure, his works which form part of his Australia Council Signature Works project. And I know, hi Zayn, shout out to you, I know that you're up there joining us today. Zayn discussed how Signature Works funding allowed him to build and create prototypes of his show, and how he was also able to leverage this funding to garner funds from other organisations. Zayn highlighted the various partner organisations working together to help him achieve his vision. He also spoke highly of his New York residency and the huge impact that experience had on his practice. Zayn is a performance artist, and part of his work is motorised instruments, I guess, as a way of, underpinning his work. Geena Williams spoke of her practice, specifically working with Noongar language. Geena spoke of her signature works original concept, which was developed at the Innovation Lab that Australia Council for the Arts hosts. Geena's work is a music and language project which centres around the four areas of, Kurut, heart, land, family and children. Geena also spoke of the difficulties with working with large organisations and the lack of understanding around collective copyright and ownership of language and knowledge, which is absolutely, central to the way in which First Nations people works, and that can cause disharmony in projects if two parties can't meet in the middle of that. Geena's work has now reached huge numbers of audiences, and through her performance and workshops, she, includes the Perth Festival, some 280 school incursions as well. So handing it back to you, Wesley, it was certainly a really fantastic session last week.
And wasn't it great to see that kind of ambition, that sense of real kind of lifting up too, this real power of artists and kind of really taking hold of their art form and their voice and making sure that it wasn't going to be compromised by others. Hey, the other thing that happened in this last week too was this fantastic, the Australia Council hosted a research thing with pattern makers, which have been doing some surveys, and they were looking at audiences for First Nations arts and cultural work. And I know it's all up on the Australia Council website. Just take a look. It was interesting to look at how loyal the audience for First Nations artwork is. Like, it's, number one, they're more loyal, they're younger, and that they are more educated than general audiences. It was fascinating to watch. And also this notion that even during this COVID time, they have been out there supporting First Nations artists and arts workers through both donations and through watching digitally, engaging with artists digitally. And you feel like going, oh, it's some really fascinating material coming from that particular piece of research. We want to, maybe we'll put a link up in the chat at some point.
That would be great.
What that was, because it was a really fantastic thing to do. Lots of people in the chat saying, you know, great segue into the weekend. That bloody Lara, she wants that dance. She wants to see dance. Yeah.
Knock it off, Lara.
Knock it off, Lara. And court as well. It's how Sharina Clanton saying you say it, court. So that idea of heart.
Thanks, Sharina.
You can't, Leanne. Lara, you can't be apologising now. We know you've gone that too far now. No. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. Thanks, Michelle. And we have our wonderful speakers here. I might welcome Ruth Langford into the room. You can, I don't know if you've unmuted there at all, Ruth, ready to talk, but we'll get started with you, and then we'll have Vicky come in and give us her presentation in a second. But Ruth, you've done so much work. Look at so many things, especially now in that Tasmanian area. But maybe if you introduce yourself to everyone and talk us through your program and what you've been doing.
Yeah, everyone, thank you so very much for the invitation to share, and first of all, paying my respects. And thank you, Leanne, for the acknowledgement of country. I'm a Yorta Yorta woman. I'm born here in Nipaluna of Tjunypa to the Tasmanian Aboriginal community. And I feel very privileged to have those belonging in two country, both within the Yorta Yorta, my family up near Marutna. Shout out to all you mob up there. But also here in Tjunypa in Tasmania, particularly growing up with such a very solid community who during the 70s were also resisting the mythology that there was no Aboriginal people here, and still holding very strongly onto practices and ways of being that imbued us with a dignified sense of who we are. And a few of those people, particularly I'd like to acknowledge Uncle Jimmy Everett. Uncle Jimmy is one of our leading senior art practices as a poet, writer, but he's also a radical. We grew up with very staunch, you know, Uncle Jimmy, Michael Mansell, and biggest mob, they're the mob that flew to Libya to see Gaddafi. You know, I grew up sitting at the table, under the table, basically listening to them fellas yarn up about who we are as sovereign people. And so Uncle Jimmy came to me in 2017 and he said, Bub, I really want to create a program that's about elders stepping forward and us as a community emboldening and enlivening our cultural expressions. And we talked about that this, in our own way, was our act of sovereignty. It was our resistance towards colonization, but first and foremost, it was our opportunity to heal intergenerational traumas, and also to teach our young people that they matter, and that we use our traditional vehicles of healing, which are art practices. The pedagogy of transmission of knowledges is through our arts practice. So also within that conversations that I had, we also spoke to Annie Lologrino, that many of you will know. She is a passionate practitioner, but also she's a leader in our community for many, many years, to not only take traditional arts practices and make sure that they're surviving, but ensure that we are thriving as a community around these ways of practicing. And we talked to her about, here in Tasmania, we don't have any art centres. We're the only state that doesn't have a cultural arts centre. We're dispersed regionally. How do we come together? Not necessarily needing to emulate what other mobs are doing, but how do we find something that enables our young people to feel like they are thriving? And so we developed a project, and we went to OzCo and we applied for the Chosen funding. Now, Zayn was great last week. He spoke about how OzCo funding can really help leverage passion projects. And with the funding from OzCo, these projects we were able to actually amplify the work that we wanted to do. So next slide, please. So the first thing when we yarned up with the elders about enlivening and emboldening cultural practices and expression, I went to them and said, well, number one, we got to invest in the art workers. We mobs that are in their kitchen making the most deadliest spoken word poetry, or they're designing or making those beautiful shell necklaces that you probably see. But where are the people who can support them, or how can we support our own arts practitioners to get savvy around? We're traders. Our cultural practice is trading. So how do we come back to building up the skill sets to enable us to make, create, heal, pass stories on, but also get savvy in the way that we're doing that? And so we undertook the first 18 months. We thought, let's focus on running parallel programs, which did look at sharing cultural practices, but also imbued people who had passion to learn how to produce, how to curate, those art workers, and how do we make sure that we're supporting those artists who want to develop their own work. They've got the skill sets. So we ran a couple of programs, and one of those was that we went to the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair and we said, we ain't got no cultural centre, but we want to be involved in this. We want to send our mob up to you, but specifically we want to utilise some of the Chosen funding to make sure that we're running a 6-month program looking at curation of work. And so in here you'll see Luana Towney and Bonnie Starrick, who worked with one of our senior knowledge keeper standing at the back next to Francesca, Tony Brown. He's a knowledge keeper around the Bark Canoes, but he's also was a senior curator at TMAG, as well as Arnie Werner, who helped set up a lot of the printing ways and organisations. And they also work with Hank Horton, somebody who actually built his own business. So we were looking at how do they know about not only the ins and outs of setting up a gallery, but what about social enterprises? What about doing your tax? What about all these things that actually support us to share the work. And so we were great. The first inaugural representation of Tasmanian artists, we had 23 artists, went to DAF, and we now have those two have gone on to create their own works. One's actually, cross fingers, going to get this deadly job in the arts department. So that was something we thought that's really important. And we are now, they're actually working for us to make those an online gallery and a point of sale, and have moved on and on and on and on from that. So next slide. Another thing that enabled us to leverage was really the heart of hearts, is working with our young people around their passion, knowing that they matter, knowing that their unique passions are important, but as connected to that is, you know where you belong and know that you're supported, that you have people around you. So I've been the founder and creative director of a very small festival, Nariniara Good Spirit Festival, for about 10 years, that basically started in my backyard with a couple of elders around a fire saying, we want to yarn up. I said, well, I'll invite some people and we'll play some songs around. And we had like hundreds turn up. And that's just grown and grown and grown. And so we now run an internship program. And so we had 32 interns from our last festival. And out of that, we basically said, you come with an idea and your passion, and we'll support you on it. So we sort of have this circle of where you can sit. We've got a couple of people that are in this internship program who basically, before they came, they couldn't get out of their front door of their house. Their anxiety was that bad. And yet at the end of that program, they were artist liaisons at the, backstage, looking after people. And then we had a whole sliding scale where people who felt that they were ready, they actually produced the venues. They created, we worked with them on getting budgets. So it's a broad scheme around how this is. But the most important of this is that the young people, they are connected into family. So the elders come and sit with them and they teach them where they're connected and who they belong to. And so some of the internship post the festival, we then started to taking them out to other festivals. And two of our interns actually went to the Women of the World Festival in Brisbane, up at the Powerhouse. And we had a young Nunukal woman who had never met any of her family. And so she was able to go up there and she got to meet and sit with their family and hear their stories. You know, it was lucky she also got to sit with June Oscar and Jackie Huggins and all those other solid women. But she came home with a very different perspective of who she is and how she can move forward. Next slide, please. And underpinning all of this, and it's the very first thing that we do, is we take them out bush on country, and we take them with the elders. And for some of them, that they grow up with a very clear way of connecting to country, but others, they're living in town, and for some of them it was like, well, how do we call out to country? How do we sit around the fire? How do we get our own feed? You know, these things which some of us take for granted, but our kids are getting pulled into the vortex of other ways of living. And it was really important to know that it was the one thing that we said, when you're in the internship program, particularly coming up to a festival, it's going to get intense. And the thing that you can always come back to is you can just ground yourself into country and you can ask for that guidance and protection and support. You breathe deeply. And So we shared some of those Indigenous medicines therapies of way to connect and got them real solid, you know, before we even found a festival site. We took them all out. We went to country. We asked country, could we have it here? And these are some of the ways of being. We also taught them project management skills, but it was uniting both those ancient ways of being with those modern skill sets for us to be able to walk forward on our passions. Next thing. So a big part of that was in each of the projects that we run, whether or not it's a small art space project. So for this one of our senior men actually was teaching these young fellas how to make a canoe. But a big part of it is actually taking time on country for these young fellas to know that they actually matter.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's where we, next slide, thanks. How am I going for time, you mob?
Time is this abstract concept, but you've got plenty of it. So, yeah, we'll be ready to hear Vicky in another 5 minutes or so.
Great. One of the things that we discovered on this journey was open to be surprised by how spirit, and when we sit down with our elders, you just don't know what's going to come up. You know, you can have this vision of what you want in your program, and yes, create the structure around it. It's like a basket. You've got to have those ribs of the basket, but how it weaves and how it takes shape is really be open to be surprised of that. And at the festival, Uncle Jimmy asked Uncle Max and Uncle Bunna to come down and share the story, and we thought it was one thing, but what ended up happening was an understanding about the whale dreaming story and the significance of Tasmania, and also the interpretation of our symbols, and out of that the interns and those young people and the dancers danced the whale story for the first time since colonization. From that coming together, you know, there was no plan, but we did trust that when you get elders together, magic happens. And when you support the young people to trust that and to support the elders and sit down and take your time, that yeah, it was very, very grateful for the generosity of their sharing in that. Next slide, please. And underlying all this is, as I said, just understanding that our voices and our story and our action, they actually matter. Like, it was really interesting. We've been talking about this for the last couple of years, and now we got the big awareness around Black Lives Matter, and it was like, it's true, your story and how you want to make a mark, it has an impact. And so and first of all, you got support. You're not alone in this. And what I did find interesting, though, is that often our men, particularly, you know, that age group between 18 to 30 to 40-year-olds, sort of don't get the support that other parts of our community do. And so Uncle Doug, who's in the white t-shirt there, he's one of our, he's actually recently, want to pay my respects to Uncle Ronnie, who was our senior songman, recently passed on. And so now Uncle Doug is he's it in regards to, he's it. And so he said he wanted to come and share his story, but he wanted to work with Alan Mansell, who's a printmaker. And so out in the shed they went, and they invited men in the community who they knew was working with young men as well. And they did this art project which was really about, what's your mark? if you have a story, if you have a knowledge or you have a passion, how do you present that in your mark? And how do you honor that? And then how do we put those marks together to understand our interconnection with each other? So that project, first of all, started with just a printmaking, and it has actually now merged to, they wanted to work with wood. And so they started to do carving on some of the timbers. And that has now merged to, now we have partnerships with Design Tasmania, Hydro Wood, Carity's Men's Group, Arts Tasmania. And we've actually got a design showroom coming up. The men are working with furniture makers and architects. They've just like gone, yes, 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 yes. And I'm just going, yes, 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 yes. So, you know, given the scope, you get a little leg up, and all of a sudden they just, you know, that they want to be connected. They want to share their story, and they want to empower the young people coming through. And so Chosen was a very significant way around giving us recognition that it's okay, we're going to give you that little, here we are, give you that little boost. And then, as any act of sovereignty, and anybody knows, you know, our self-determination, when we have programs coming from our own mob, it just, they fly. They're the powerful things that actually help heal our people and embolden us to go forth. Next slide, please.
So beautiful, Ruth. I mean, really, I mean, everyone's saying in the chat already how inspiring this is, how wonderful it is. It's wonderful thing, but we will have to wrap this up to make sure we've got some time with Vicky as well. So let's take us through this last few slides.
Last slide. And so we now have got a place, actually a play space that we're looking to develop our own cultural arts centre down here, or something like that. And before we did anything, the men came and the elders came, and those marks that they were developing, they actually did a large scale installation on the ground before any building happened. And so you can see the concrete, but just underneath that concrete, that's the original intertidal zone where the fresh water from Kananya, the mountain, met the salt water from Tjunypa, the river. And so it may have been covered up, but we know that just under the surface is a really rich cultural place. And so for us, it's a metaphor that we can go under the surface and draw in our knowledge from our elders, and we can, they're mountain birds, we can let that fly out and create hopefully some beautiful things for the future for our descendants to come. Thank you.
That's so marvellous. We've got one more slide there for you, I think, Ruth, as well. Just a quick little, some of the links to some of the projects. And in fact, some of these links have actually gone into the chat as we've gone through. Lots of people saying how fantastic it is to see this work and the healing power of the work. And I'm actually quite remiss because we didn't talk a little bit about the Chosen program and what Chosen really means as well. So I jumped the gun a bit there. So sorry, Ruth, to throw you in the middle of it all. But I know that, Leanne, you were instrumental in this program as well. Just tell us a little bit about what the program was set up to do, because obviously what Ruth's doing is doing that very clearly, passing on to the next generation.
Well, you know, as Chosen is something that's very close to my heart in particular. You know, as a practitioner, both, you know, working out in the field and working alongside of elders and senior cultural bosses, and in reflection of what's happening at a policy level, and particularly around what funding applications and ideas and concepts our community is sending to us at Australia Council, it's very clear that the work that, part of the work, or very much the work that we'd like to undertake, is the whole intergenerational transfer of knowledge. And Chosen was, the title of Chosen was selected because as we know, our elders watch us as young people. They look at certain qualities that we have, and they will choose specific types of people to carry on areas of leadership. And so the premise of the idea was that elders had the capacity to be able to be funded to tap those young people on the shoulder, to go, you're going to be the next generation of knowledge keepers in this country, and we will invest in you to be able to be that custodian and knowledge keeper for the future. And what we've seen, and Wesley, you would agree with this, is an extraordinary uptake to the chosen program. You know, I think was it your conversation or Vicky's yesterday when we spoke, this is about cultural capital. This is about us retaining and maintaining what we have, getting it onto the next generations, and making sure that we've got cultural legacies for the future.
Yeah, and that thing too that, you know, we often talk about the terrible situation around, let's call it unemployment, about violence in the home. We even talk about terrible things of incarceration and suicide. But if you give a cultural grounding to especially the young people, that a lot of those things are diverted. A lot of those things kind of moved on. I mean, Ruth, would you agree with that? This idea of how give people a cultural grounding, and some of these problems, not that they disappear, but they get put into perspective that helps save young people's lives and strengthen them.
Absolutely, without a doubt. It's about respect. Our culture is very much built on respect, a respect of not only our elders, but respect of the self, this reciprocity around it. And when we put into the mix a reverence to culture, we get imbued with a dignity of who we are, and therefore we're less likely to be hurting in a way that we need to either self-medicate or we get wild and we're punching on with somebody, or we, you know, we're hurting ourselves, you know, suicide or self-asides around that. You get someone who knows that they matter. They, you know, there was a young lad who I worked with. I remember being in the car, we drove past the prison, and he said, "Oh, I'm going up there soon." And I said, "Are you going to visit?" Knowing that he didn't have any direct family in there. And he goes, "No, all black fellas go to jail." And I went, hang on, bud. Now, that fella now is working in a land management position. You know, like he got diverted away from jail, but he was on that track. He was going there for sure. But, you know, now he's dancing, he's solid as, he's just got his new barb, new godmother, I'm real happy. Yeah. But, you know, we all know that. We know that.
And lots of things in the chat already, lots of people saying, like Cynthia Mansell saying that, you know, she spent spent 12 months on her professional development and being mentored and producing opportunities and things. And she wouldn't have been able to do it without Chosen. And also passing on knowledge is important out Outback Northern Territory with the support of the TFFFs. Please excuse me if I don't know who they actually are. Facilitates culture and camps in Ngunnawal, strengthening culture and country camps where youth go out bush with elders to connect with country and culture. Yeah, so really strengthening this culture, especially with the younger people as well. Really amazing stuff to see there. Look, we've got another amazing speaker coming. Look, Vicky Cousins. I don't know, Leanne. Whenever I'm in the presence of Vicky Cousins, and I call it a presence because she's like she is a conduit through which the old people talk to us, you know, and she'll be shamed out by this. That's just the nature of who she is. But, you know, she speaks to us now through all the different generations that have gone before. And we're talking about respect with Ruth there. I have such the deepest respect for this woman. I mean, her and her family have had generations of contribution to our artistic and cultural life. And I just think that Vicky, look, one of the things that Vicky said yesterday, and sorry to take your thunder here, Vicky, but she said, "Oh, I'm not an artist. I'm not an artist." No, you're a cultural woman. You're a proper cultural woman, and that's the power. It's not just the art; it's the culture, it's the language, it's that hair. She's so deadly. Anyway, I might leave you to introduce the wonderful Vicky Cousins there, Leanne, because I'm tongue-tied. I'm just lost for words whenever I see this one. So over to you, Leanne.
Thank you. Look, it's a great pleasure, Vicky. I'll get you to unmute yourself. Look, it's a great pleasure to introduce Vicky Cousins. It's Vicky, your work is extraordinary, particularly around your cloak making and the whole revival of that cloak making work that you've been doing in Victoria. You're a Tjunypa woman.
Yes.
Would you like to introduce yourself, your cultural background, who you are, where you're from, who's your mob?
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for having me today. And Wesley has totally embarrassed me with all those fine, wonderful words. Thank you, Wesley, for the kind words. So thank you, Ruth. That was wonderful to hear, and you tell the story and how you express that really beautifully. There's such warmth and depth and feeling there, besides all the deadly words that you use to describe the way you talk about the work that you're doing in the community. So it's really great to hear. I have never been to Tasmania, only once. It's on big top of my to-do list because it's beautiful from what I've seen and I hear. So now I know you, I'll be able to come visit. And I know Auntie Lola and Vicky and,
we'll scheme up to get you on a project down here. We'd love to have you.
I only been on the tarmac for about an hour once on a diverted plane. That was it. Stupid, eh? So there was a lot in what you were talking about, and also Leanne and Wesley, that was great segues into, and I'm like, oh, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that. I will talk about Chosen though, and that how that is exactly what you described, Leanne, in supporting our ways of doing and being and knowing, and that's so important, because we had a conversation yesterday in our technical kind of hook up to make sure this all worked today, and talked about resources and funding and how, the Western system is not structured to support us in any way, and they don't listen properly and have never done. So it's exciting to see that you're able to make that impact at that level to get the support as is Cherish. I'm so bummed I didn't get to apply or get people I know to apply for that this round, but I think that's so important because it's one of the things that's underpinning my work now. 20 years down the track from starting out on possums and language work in particular. I've been, working around in our community in Victoria and home for about 40 years now, but on the language and the possums, it's around 20, and it's, like you've been busy doing all that work and you run around, and, I'm getting a bit older now, not that old as some people, but, getting there. And Yulin Teach is my kind of honorific title. Tirikianis calls me Yulin Teach, and that means old woman possum. So I let him because I kind of like that. But where I'm sitting now is my my approach, my everything, and my focus is absolutely in our being autonomous and sovereign. I can't be bothered talking to the mainstream and government. I've spent 40 years working in our community you know, reaching out to mainstream and trying to make a difference and impact. And we all have in our own ways created some change, but it's a continuous thing. It's still a lot the same. So now my focus is my community and my family and what energy and time I have left. My desire is to focus my energy there. So I'm not going to spend much time going out talking to students at uni or public talks to white fellas or anything, because, you know, I'm over trying to educate them. They can educate themselves, and there's plenty of young ones we're training up, Ruth and everyone else, so they can keep doing that good work, because it's all, you know, we need to fight on all fronts, and that's still an ongoing one. So for me now is that focus in community and family and living legacy. So this is my favourite phrase, is living legacy. We've got all the digital what's under the sun. We've got videos, we've got DVDs. I've still got old floppy disks. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Probably chuck them out, because I haven't got a computer you can stick them in anymore. You know, we've got everything, podcasts, blogs, whatever. There's so many digital platforms and ways to capture, or I don't even like that word, sorry, delete that, you know, record our stories and our knowledges, particularly with this idea of transference, you know, across generations. And that's great. And we have to do that. And we absolutely have to do that concurrently with living legacy. So getting that knowledge into the young people, not just by them watching a DVD, but exactly sitting around the fire, Ruth, or those ways in direct contact with the knowledge holders. So in my latest chosen project, which is pretty behind time, as Michelle knows, is that focus on family clan groups. So I'm working within our cultural structures of family clan groups. I'm not trying to work with a prescribed body corporate or an Aboriginal corporation. It's family clan groups, and that living legacy, so that people can, because like my dad started our language stuff back in the 90s, the early 1990s, and published our dictionary in 96. We still got no speakers. Like, when is that going to happen? I've got 5 daughters. We didn't have access to our language when they were little so much. And I've got 15 grandkids, and they still don't have their mother tongue. Like, when is that going to happen if I don't make it happen? So we spent 20 years with words. So now I'm focusing on grammar building and immersion. So I want to support our oral transference. Our way of transferring knowledge is that oral. You know, it's handed on through the story, the song, the dance, the ceremony, and being in contact, because, you know, we don't all live in our home country. We don't all even live near our families all the time anymore, where you could just ride your bike around your auntie and uncles or whatever. Everyone lives so far apart that a lot of our young people now aren't getting that opportunity to sit around or be with older people and elders and people who have stories, you know, in their family or cultural knowledge to, you know, find, learn, share. So that's kind of what I'm trying to kind of create, those opportunities within family clan groups to have that connectivity. Not that they haven't already, but and obviously Zoom actually is pretty good, really. I don't mind Zoom. Been doing a lot of Zooming around, but it's not the same as being together. So with the current project has a language and cultural practice focus, and I've had a couple of meetings, and we're having a few Zooms, and then we'll go on country and do immersive practice on country. And within that, we're making a cloak, so people, through that making and doing, there's language and cultural learning in sitting around the fire or sitting around together, no phones, because it's terrible how and I'm a little bit naughty sometimes because I do let the grandkids get on my phone. I would never have done that with my kids. I do with the grannies.
Yeah, because you're a bit soft on them. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think. Hey, I'm just thinking, Vicky, that the next image that we've got is about community and legacy.
Oh, yeah.
That you've talked about, and just this notion that of the possum skins and bringing families together and things that you've talked about here. And you've talked about living legacy, which is a beautiful idea. That these
it's it's not really nothing new under the sun, but we've got to kind of recalibrate and refocus back to those things, and we are trying to do that, and we actually have the freedom and the opportunity to do that because of all of, and that this sign here that I'm doing is the sign language for ancestors, those over your shoulder who've gone before you.
People can't see you do that. Do the video, describe it. Yeah.
So your hands go either shoulder, you get your hands and you can go like that. And that means ancestors, those who've gone before you, right? I love it. I don't know much sign language, but I love that. Where was I going with that? Oh, the ancestors and those who've gone before us, they absolutely inform, and the elders living now inform and guide and teach us. And that's my experience, particularly in the possums, and my father's passed away now, but I carry on our language work. And yes, there's been a huge growth and demand in our communities for language in the last 5 years, 10 years. It's huge. And, perhaps we might have a little bit of a gas bag about funding and resources because Aboriginal languages are funded so underfunded. It's a disgrace. We get way less than the languages other than English, the Lotes. And, we have the oldest living languages in the world.
And many of them threatened as well, as all you were saying.
No, they're all endangered. Not many. All of them are endangered, even the ones that are strong, because of that transmission from elders, and whatever's adults to young people, because of English and Creole and the internet.
Yeah. If you go to the next slide there, Vicky, because you talk about language in your next slide.
Yeah, so with the possums, that's been, obviously a big, huge part of my life that was gifted to me as a vision from the makers of the Lake Conda possum skin cloak. It wasn't something I found out until quite a few years after I'd started making cloaks, but one of my great-grandfathers was one of the makers, so that kind of just blew me away. And I've been continuing that on, but so it features a lot in my work, of course, but this community, family, language and legacy language has always been something I've used in my creative practice, and it's just become more integrated as I go along. And so in the top right corner there's a song we wrote when we were making a possum cloak down home. This is a photo of some of my family there, my husband and grannies and daughter, one of them at our family language camp we had, not last year, the year before. And some of like my other family there at the River Language exhibition at Melbourne Museum that I did with Brendan Kennedy and for the Victorian Aboriginal Corporation for Languages. So we've got this massive mural and a soundscape, and it's about to go online because we've just been developing the digital content. So everyone will be able to see it soon. And we have recordings of all the language groups in Victoria. There's over 40, and different words, for the different totems and animals and things like that. It's pretty awesome. So that's sort of the trying to build that living legacy with the grandkids in exposing them to language and getting them. And with the current project, what I'm doing is working with the family clan groups on what language do they need in everyday living. Like I can teach them to say, the mother is in the house, the fish is in the water, but how relevant is that? Like you want to be able to talk. So I'm working with things like, how do you sit down and have a meal together, or how do you bath the kids? Like what's the language you use? And I can sit down and write something, but I'm working with them to develop the language that they want to use. So then we can work on translating that into our own language. And so therefore each day they might only get to speak fully fluent Gunditj Mara for 1 minute, because it's really hard to be fluent for longer than that at this point in time in a fluent consecutive kind of conversational way. So, and building those moments of immersion so that, you know, they'll all join up one day. And I really am trying to focus to see some speakers before I'm on the next journey. After I'm about 90, so I've got about 30 years left to get this done.
Don't, you're not 60. Don't be like that. Let's look at this next slide, because you're talking about family. You've got a lot of conversation here about family, and you're saying that, are you only working within your blood relations at the moment, or are there other interested groups? Or
yeah, well, there's a focus on family clan. So like my cousin John, Clark and Brett and them guys. And then I'm also working with like Eileen Alberts and her family group in Haywood. And so Gunditj Mara people, because it's our language, but family clan groups, and a lot with my extended family in terms of, well, and my sister-in-law who is there in that white, she's got half a white cloak stitched up. You see that? That's my husband's sister. And I've been working with Geena for the last couple of years and brought her into cloak making, and she's just gone, you should see her Facebook page. Oh my God, she's amazing. Her artwork is phenomenal. And she does purposing stuff, but she went up there, that's on her country, working with her country women, and they made a cloak for Gooliga Mountain. And Gooliga Mountain is the women's mountain up in Ewan country, where Uncle Max comes from, Ruth. And when Gooliga Mountain, who is the mother whale, when the mist is around Gooliga, that's when she's got her possum cloak on. So Cheryl Davison brought us together to work with the women, and they made this white cloak. So Geena's like, with that, Geena, that's one of my daughters, my grandsons and my sister there on a public art project. My niece, for the Aboriginal Housing Board, we did a gig. In there's a little photo of Eileen and Tidda, who are like cultural mentors in a way, but also sister girls, and Esther there. That other lady's Carleen. We did a cloak at the dental hospital. So we're working also in how do we bring our cultural practices into places like hospitals and institutions. And you can't see me because the sun's coming in.
No, we see you in your angelic state.
Yeah, which is an unusual thing.
Well, this thing, Vicky, I've got a question about, how much do you, because I know lots of pressure for universities and for the academy, different bodies like that to come in and to help codify all this stuff, or do you say, nah, stay away, it's our family business?
Well, I'm also currently employed as the Vice Chancellor's Indigenous Research Fellow at RMIT, and working on the Gunditj Mara grammar rebuilding, like doing the actual linguistic, well, it's linguistic and cultural work as well, because you can do linguistics, but then you have to have the cultural knowledge and work with that to reinvigorate, redream your language and enliven it again. So I'm also working, because I work with VACL, the State Language Centre, we've just got some seeding research funds, and I'm very interested in researching to do exactly what Leanne's talked about in changing how things are done and recording our own evidence, because if we are trying to find funding and we're trying to make policy and make an impact, we're looking at a lot of Canadian and New Zealand evidence when you're trying to evidence stuff. And we've got so much. Like, what if all what Ruth's done is documented? What if what I've done and other people who are doing so much is documented, and we create our own evidence? Because there's a big story there. We know the white fellas are looking for ways to be into the future. We've got all the answers. We know that. Like Ruth said, we know how healing and how to be and how to live in a way that is inclusive, that everyone has a place of belonging, because that's what our culture is. Everything has a place of belonging. Every raindrop, blade of grass, human being. That's why we've got so many cousins, because we're all connected. You know, not just by blood. You got your blood cousins, but the birds, the wind, everything, we're connected. And the white fellas, only just some of them are starting to wake up to that.
Well, and they give it that whole thing about, it's about environmentalism. And you go, no. It's actually about your spiritual connection and your family connection to place. It's not rocket science, is it? If you are connected, if you are related to this animal, you will protect it.
Yeah.
That's not hard. Your next slide here is about family and legacy. I mean, goodness, you're contributing so much to a legacy beyond even in your own family, by the sounds of it. That your work at RMIT is looking at, changing some of the ways people learn or trust and believe in cultural knowledge, not just university knowledge. And when you see these multiple generations, or as you've talked about what you do, it's pretty fascinating to see your legacy, your DNA legacy, but also your cultural legacy being played out there. It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, it's been a great honour and a privilege, and also with that, that comes responsibility. So, I'm not unaware of, that responsibility. And like I said, the next part is that living legacy. And my daughter there, who's dancing on the beach, her two little boys are next to her there in their possum cloaks she's made for them. And she's leading the dancers across the bridge following Nawit Parbanada, Carolyn Briggs, Bunurong Elder in Melbourne. They're doing a swan dance actually for the Womanjika Festival at Footscray Community Arts, where we're involved. And then she's up there been teaching at the River Language. And this other one where the girls are in the cloaks, that's my nieces and my daughter and some of my nephews. That's at Fed Square, where I did the campfire thing for 13 years or something. They just stopped it the last couple of years.
Oh, have they? That was a wonderful project, Vicky. I remember sitting there, I think one of the last times I saw you was around that fire at Fed Square.
And we had so many people come and, do stuff there.
Mm.
And then the bottom right is, because us Gunditjmara, as you can tell, we're on a good paddock. That's my cousin there. We eat well. And my dad, who's passed, sitting there with the grey hair, and my little grandson, who's now a big, smelly 12-and-a-half-year-old with size 10 feet, expensive on the shoes. That's him there, and he's, participated in the dance, and then he's up on the stage there with the clapsticks. That's him there, next to Yaron, and the Yaron there up on the stage at the museum was doing a dance and cultural kind of language song session with the audience who came to the launch of the River of Language exhibition. And that's some of the other grandsons up there with her. We were dancing up there on the right to all the old people at the old people's home in Warrnambool there a few years back. So that's for me is the continuation of that, and trying to focus on a bit more to the grandkids now, because some of them don't know as much as you would want them to know, because you've been busy running around doing stuff. It's like, hang on a minute.
Yeah, and that power of the grandparent, isn't it? I think the grandparent has that a little bit more time, has a little bit more sense of how they can help out the grandchildren. I'm going to ask now, we might turn the cameras back on now, turn off the
Yep.
So we can all see each other's face. Though, Vicky, we're going to see you in your kind of beatified state. You being your kind of there. This wonderful sense in the chat already. Lots of people talking about how it's important about family, about legacy, about passing on, and Chosen being a really wonderful vehicle here. But I know that Vicky, you wanted to raise. Oh, actually, I'll just show everyone the idea of ancestor. Is both hands, wasn't it, over the shoulder like
On
this?
the shoulder, yeah. You just go like that as a sort of to show that those behind you and those coming is down forward. So it's beautiful. Sign language, yeah.
Makes sense, doesn't it? But you were saying then about the funding, and you want to have a bit of a kind of go at talking about funding and things like that as well. And I guess, jump in here on this one as well, Ruth.
Well, yeah, I think that now we have to absolutely, it's the time, and we're going to see more of it, I hope, out the other side of this COVID conspiracy, whatever it is, for our ways to come to the forefront and to be supported. And we have to be wholly, right there in actually actioning them and not waiting anymore. We just have to do it. And funding is, it is what it is. But like obviously OzCo have had the opportunity to change some of those things, but the system is still the system. And, how many times have we provided advice? I just won't, if it's not a partnership, which is the new word instead of engagement or consultation, and yeah, partnership's probably a good word, but if it's not a real partnership, then go away. I don't want to talk to you.
I had Megan Cope said to me the other day, she said, we were talking about someone, and she said, that racist there needs to go away, get some good manners.
Yeah.
Off you go off, get some good manners, come back to me when you've got good manners. Because it's that thing where so often people just assume and push on their thoughts to you and stuff. Ruth, I mean, you've had these situations as well where, you've had to go, actually, I'm not going to spend all my energy educating you or looking at what you need. So I'm going to focus on us and what we need.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on that one, Ruth?
Well, first of all, I love the delete button on Facebook. I just delete them now. I don't even worry about response. You're gone. I think I might be in a situation because I have an Aboriginal mother and an Australian father. I do come across both sides of my family where I am the result of that partnership. And so I do have a great sense and belief in finding people who have genuine want to be with us. And I do have conversations now about the one thing that I love about Chosen and Cherish is that we weren't responding to a government policy priority. We got the opportunity to say, this is what's important to us. And so within our conversations around who we partner with, who we accept funding from, how we go, it's not about the equal reciprocity. I want to see a privileging of our mob now.
Yeah, exactly.
Because, when you've got what's them seesaw things, you can't just come to the middle. It won't change it. You've got to come over in order for the equality to happen. And so a lot of those things that I say when I'm looking at the partnership, first of all, we chose to explore other options rather than organisations. We're choosing to explore a social enterprise option so that we can have a greater say based upon our elders, what they want to see happen, as well as, it's not about we being invited to their program. It's like we'll choose who we want to invite based upon their the truth about their willingness to support unconditionally without the strings.
Yes.
And often a lot of those, I did have the question around festivals at the moment, given the atrocity that happened with the mining company and the destruction of our sacred, such important sites in Australia. And it's just, there you go. It's like, where are we in regards to making those decisions around how we act? How can we find those partnerships? And I actually have a bit of faith that we are in this new potential of time, and that there are people willing to invest, willing to, because they realise that it's critical on the planet right now that Indigenous knowledges are actually privileged. We got it. We got to do this, not only for our own people, but for the planet, health and well-being as well.
Well, as you're saying too, I think Vicky, you were suggesting that without that knowledge, if the rest of this country doesn't accept First Nations knowledges, in fact, they'll just keep doing what they're doing, and they'll wreck stuff because they don't feel that relationship to land and language and things. I mean, Vicky, we've just, the last 2 minutes before we have to finish up, but this sense of in the chat, people feeling about how they're uplifted and quite optimistic and things. Are you optimistic? Are you feeling that there's good things happening and that there's a good future ahead of us?
Yes, I am. And because I think exactly, I agree with Ruth, we are in a time of change, and it's a time of sharing where it's time for our knowledges to come out, and there are people out there who are listening, and the other people who are still stuck in their old mindset will be brought along anyway with the flow of the inflow of the new. I think we're in a time of change and transition. I mean, at the same time, you still come up against all the same old, and I'm so over it that I don't even do Facebook or anything, because I don't watch the news. I don't do anything like that. I really don't participate at all in any of the mainstream, as little as possible. If I want to know anything, I ask the kids or my husband or something, because they get on Facebook. Yeah. So, but I'm optimistic. We have to be, because look at our amazing young people that are coming through. Hallelujah. We'll be able to move over and sit down in the chair and watch them.
And boss them around, tell them to go get you a cup of tea.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I'm practicing that.
But I'd really like our young people to not wait. Don't wait. Step up and ask.
Yeah.
You know, people like Ruth and Vicky and Wesley yourself, we've been working, 30 years, 40 years in these spaces. Mm. And you're right, both of you are right. We get so tied down and committed to the bigger fight, with institutions and all of that sort of stuff that we do, that it takes us away from our core centre of our family. Yeah. And so, for young people to go, it's okay to step up and say, hey, Aunt, how about, we do a family camp somewhere, or, we get our mob together and spend 2 days out on country over a weekend. Yeah.
Yep.
There also, for me, around culture is, when do you start paying for culture? Can culture be bought? Can you go, where is the legacy and responsibility of family to hand over knowledge, and not expect also that public funds may also pay for that? Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I think you just do it, don't you? Like, you live it, your family lives it, but to have support, that's okay too. But it does. You don't have to sit around and wait for it, obviously. But I'm ready to get out the way. I'm trying to make space and move over and get out the way for them young ones, And I'm not going to walk off into the sunset and not be available, but I'm really ready for, to be stepping out of some of the spaces that I've been holding, or opening doors. I'm happy to get out the way.
Can I say, before you get out of the way, both you and Ruth, Vicky and Ruth, just how powerful you are, and many people in the chat just saying how powerful and optimistic people get from listening to artists like yourselves who are really doing the most amazing things. And I meant every word I said about you, Vicky, and we've been working together in different ways or known each other for I don't know how many decades now, but just to say every time I see your work, I am just rewarded in my soul. And it's so good to see your family benefiting from all of that stuff and hopefully feeding you along the way. And hopefully you're here for many, many decades to come. And Ruth, similarly, this sense of what you're doing in your community is so powerful. And everyone in the chat saying this, how powerful it is to have our sense of focusing on ourselves and making sure our communities are strong, because then the changes really occur as well. So thank you, Vicky and Ruth. We're going to go jump back to the PowerPoint. Were they amazing, Leanne? They're both just two amazing human beings.
Absolutely inspirational.
So inspirational. Anyway, here we've got some quick little things in the last couple of minutes. Quick grants update, just saying, yes, get in there. If you need to adjust things, the Australia Council's listening to you. Talk to your grants officer. There's also all of this analysis and research that's around, and we put a couple of links in there as well, especially the pattern makers one around First Nations audiences. Get into that. Next slide. Thanks, Michelle. Then just some of the resources the Australia Council has. Check out their website, especially the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander First Nations roundtables. Check them out, the COVID-19 information there, and also the Facebook groups, which are being, even though maybe not for Vicky, you can ring me, Vicky, I'll talk to you anytime. I'll talk to you about what's on those ones, but it's really a sense of keeping people up to date with what's going on there. Next slide, thanks, Michelle. Yes, there's still some money through the crisis cash for Theatre Network Australia, and it'll be interesting to see what comes up next. You know, when we're saying that new 250 million, the big talk now is, do we get more JobKeeper, job seeker beyond September, and how do we look after people? And I heard one big criticism, one of the reasons why we're not getting into job seeker a lot if you're a sole trader or if you run out of work and stuff, is also our tax. You know, you need to be up to date with your tax records, and sometimes that's a very difficult thing to do. So if you're thinking that, oh goodness, the next 6 to 8 months is problematic, you have to get up to date with your tax records and all that kind of stuff. Get it all submitted so you can get onto job seeker or JobKeeper's a different thing, but you've got to be up to date with that. Because let's get prepared that this might not be something that's finished in a month. It might be around for another 6 to 12 months for many artists. So get yourself ready. If you've been holding back, it's the end of the financial year. Get yourself up to date at this point in time so you can get some of these government assistances that are coming your way. Next slide, thanks, Michelle. Then some for mental health and support beyond Blue, and some resources in Indigenous languages there. All of this is on the Australia Council website, and you can go back and actually have a look at the other 14 of these roundtables that we've done so far. You can have a look at all of this material that'll be there on the Australia Council website. Next slide, thanks, Michelle. And next week is the end. Next week is the final webinar, where on the 3rd of July, Leanne, you and I will say goodbye to this format, and we might enter into a new format. Who knows what that is? And it's going to be over to you, because we've been looking. There are lots of people who've come back regularly, and we're going to invite you onto this format to say what you think you've got out of it. You know, we've listened to Vicky and Ruth today, and many other speakers over the last 15 weeks. Our final roundtable next week, and I've got a little surprise planned for everyone. A little surprise. So if you know people who haven't been on because they've started to get busy again, I think we should say farewell to this webinar series with a bit of a bang and a little bit of a party at home.
No, Lara, there's no interpretive dance, believe me.
You never know. A bit of interpretive dance could go a long way. But a big thank you to everyone. We've run just a minute over time there, but can I just say, Leanne, I feel so bubbly. Is that the right word? I feel bubbly.
Yeah, it lifts my spirits Fridays, this roundtable. It really does. It makes me feel really connected to our community.
Yeah.
it's wonderful.
Well,
Yeah.
you give us the final word and wrap us up.
Look, I just wanted to thank Ruth and Vicky again. You're both such inspirational women in our sector, and I really, truly value the work that you're doing, and I'm so thrilled to hear how important Chosen and Cherish have been in leveraging the work that you're doing in the cultural space and the artistic space. And so thank you for advocating for that. They're very important to us, and I know, Wesley being the chair of the strategy panel for Australia Council, and that team sitting around the table, we certainly do, value that going out into our community. So look, I just wanted to say have a great weekend. Thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us. And Wesley, always a pleasure to be sitting across Zoom with you. Thank you to everyone in the back room as well for your support today.
Keep safe, everyone. Yes, there may be a second wave ahead of us.
Yep.
Wash your hands, practice social distancing. Make sure those who are in your bubble are in a bubble of love. Love your family, keep them close to you, make sure your community is safe, and we'll see you again next week for our final one. All right, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.